Welcome everyone to yet another edition of our video contributions for COBB tuning. Today we will be installing the COBB 3-inch SS downpipe. This product will help your turbo flow more efficiently and give you a boost both in power and sound. Please remember that with this downpipe you are now entering Stage 2, which requires an upgraded cam-driven fuel pump, such as the Autotech available from COBB Tuning's website. A few notes before we begin. This process will take most people anywhere from 2 to 4 hours, depending upon your skill set and tools on hand. One tip to make this install go flawlessly is to watch the video ahead of time, take notes as to which bolts you'll be removing, and spray them with either a WD-40 or PB Blaster penetrating oil. This will turn most problem bolts into effortless wrenching. Start off by getting the vehicle on a lift or placing jack stands under the front of the vehicle to get it up in the air to give you some more room to work. Make sure the emergency brake is set firmly and you'll block the rear wheels if you're using jack stands. Well, let's get started. Inside of your box you'll find your COBB 3-inch SS downpipe. All hardware needed for this installation will already be on the vehicle itself. The tools required to install the COBB 3-inch SS downpipe are as follows. You will need a 3/8 ratcheting wrench, an 8mm socket, a 10mm socket, a 12mm socket, a 14mm socket, and a 14mm deep well socket. You will need a flathead screwdriver, a pair of lockjaw pliers, a small wobble extension, a 6-inch straight extension, and a 6-inch wobbled extension. You will need a 14mm wrench. You will need a 12mm wrench and a 10mm wrench. Also a pair of needle nose pliers and the appropriate oxygen sensor socket and a torque wrench reading at least 70 foot-pounds. Using a 10mm socket, we will remove the 2 bolts holding on the intercooler shroud, and then we will remove the intercooler shroud itself. Using a 12mm socket, we will remove the 3 nuts that secure the intercooler to the top of the motor. Using a 10mm wrench, we will loosen the clamps holding the 2 rubber hoses onto the intercooler. Using a pair of needle nose pliers, we will remove the vacuum hose from the bypass valve. Using a pair of lockjaw pliers, we will take the clamp on the bypass valve return hose and slide it down the hose away from the nose cone of the bypass valve. With this being done, you should now be able to lift up and away the intercooler from the engine. We will now remove the 5 8mm bolts that hold the heat shield onto the exhaust manifold and then maneuver the heat shield out. Unclip the primary O2 sensor from the wiring harness and remove the O2 sensor using a O2 sensor specific socket. The O2 sensors are prone to stripping the threads during removal from the stock downpipe. You may need to replace an O2 sensor if the threads are damaged after removal. COBB highly recommends using a good penetrating lubricant like WD-40 or PB Blaster on the O2 sensors, where they thread into the exhaust well in advance of attempting installation. Also, we recommend having the proper O2 sensor socket for removal along with the proper extensions and/or wobbly extensions and/or U-joints to make sure that the socket is straight on the sensor and that you can apply force in the right direction. It may be a good idea to make sure a local dealer has one in stock before attempting installation. COBB Tuning is not responsible for any stripped threads. Now remove the 3 10mm bolts that attach the second heat shield to the first cat or downpipe section and remove the heat shield. Using a 14mm socket and a combination of wobbly extensions, remove the 5 nuts that attach the first cat section or downpipe to the turbocharger. The nuts are the locking type and can be difficult to remove. They will have resistance until they are almost fully removed off the stud. Also, the stud is prone to coming out with the nut. COBB highly recommends using a good penetrating lubricant like WD-40 or PB Blaster on the nuts so that they are less likely to be seized to the stud. COBB Tuning is not responsible for any strip threads. From underneath the car, remove the two 14mm nuts and springs that secure the rear of the second cat section to the catback. Next, remove the two 14mm bolts and springs that secure the second cat section to the first cat section, or downpipe. Slide the hanger rods out of the rubber hangers and remove the second cat section. Now we will unclip the secondary oxygen sensor's wiring harness from the vehicle, allowing us to remove the secondary oxygen sensor. Remove the two 12mm bolts that attach the downpipe brace to the downpipe, the two 14mm bolts that attach the brace to the engine, and then you can remove the downpipe section from the car. You may have to twist and maneuver the downpipe to get it past everything. Be patient and don't force anything. Make sure the factory gasket for the downpipe or turbo connection is in place and move the COBB downpipe up and onto the turbocharger. Twisting and maneuvering may be required to get it up and into position, and on all of the studs at the outlet of the turbo. Remove the donut gasket from the rear of the factory first and second cat sections without damaging the gasket. It is often best done with a flathead screwdriver that is fairly sharp or a metal gasket scraper. Both donut gaskets are the same and either can be used. Take the one that looks to be in the best condition and attach it to the end of your downpipe, which will connect to your catback section. Slide the hanger rods into the rubber hangers. Reinstall the 5 nuts that attach the first cat section or downpipe to the turbocharger and torque them to between 38 and 51 foot-pounds. Use the 2 spring bolts and springs that were used to attach the stock first cat to second cat to secure the rear of the downpipe to the catback. Torque them to between 38 and 51 foot-pounds of torque. Install the second O2 sensor into the bung in between the cat and flex section. It may be wise to use some high-temp anti-seize on the threads and torque it to between 29 to 49 foot-pounds of torque. Then clip it back into the wiring harness. We will now install the primary O2 sensor into the bung that is cast into the turbo outlet casting. It may be wise to use some high-temp anti-seize on the threads and torque it to between 29 to 49 foot-pounds of torque, and then clip it back into the wiring harness. We will now tighten the 5 8mm bolts that hold the heat shield onto the exhaust manifold down to secure it. We can now reset the intercooler back on top of the engine. Using a 10mm wrench, we will now tighten up the 2 rubber hoses that connect to the intercooler. And we can now reinstall the bypass valve return hose clamp to its original position. Then reinstall the bypass valve's vacuum line and secure it with the clamp. We will now secure the intercooler back to the engine using the 3 12mm nuts. And finally, we will reinstall the intercooler shroud, securing it with the 2 10mm bolts. Make sure to go back over your work and make sure nothing is loose and the downpipe is now fully installed. After a few days of driving, I recommend going back over your work, checking for any exhaust leaks or loose bolts. I've had my COBB SS downpipe for a little over a week now, and I love the new deeper rumble my exhaust has, and the turbo spool comes on much sooner in the RPM band. Just another example of the quality we've come to expect from COBB Tuning. Thank you for watching and stay tuned as the weeks go by, and we'll be going over more products COBB Tuning has for your MAZDASPEED3.